There we go. Okay, so to start off, thank you both for taking the time to do this. I know in these weird times, everybody's schedule is kind of strange. If you can, share your names with me and your roles there where you are. So who you are and what you do.
All right, I'm Michael Phillips, and I am keeper of the house.
Okay.
And my name's Brian Jackson, and I'm the assistant keeper of the house.
Okay. Now, if my research is right, the house is the only house of refuge that's left on the coast, the Atlantic coast of Florida. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about what the houses were used for and how this one has survived.
Okay, the life-saving service in the 1870s was trying to provide food, clothing, and shelter for shipwreck survivors. When they got to Florida, because of the lack of population, they had to rethink their program. So instead of having a life-saving station, they had a house on the beach in the middle of nowhere with one guy in it. His job, food, clothing, shelter for shipwreck survivors, involved walking basically 30 miles of beach. So if he sees a storm coming, he gets his gear together and he starts. And each house is 30 miles apart. So he's going to go 15 north, 15 south. Of course, this takes a couple of days because everything is done either or on foot. In his case, on foot.
And let me interrupt you real quick. The video paused for me. So right before you said on foot, what did you say? I'm sorry. Said he had
on the water. Everything was either done on the water or on foot.
Okay. And you said so he had to walk 15 miles north, 15 miles south to look for anybody who may have survived.
Right.
Or they would just, show up, in the middle of the night, they'd show up bleeding from a wreck, right? This is a 24/7 type of situation. And you asked also, how did the house survive? That's a very good question. This house is the oldest structure in Martin County. It's built in 1875. It was the second one built out of 10. And there's no, the other house has been abandoned, knocked down, condos built, you name it. This one is the one and only left. And a couple reasons why is it sits on a rock formation called Anastasia Rock. The house actually sits right on top of the rock. And it's also built out of Dade County pine, which is not conducive to termites, which is a good thing. And it can persevere through the salt climate, because we basically have about 40 yards between the Indian River Lagoon and the Atlantic Ocean. So it's a really treacherous spot to have a building, but it has persevered for many, many years.
What happened to the rest of them was, at the end of World War II, during World War II, all houses of refuge were naval observation stations. At the end of the war, the Navy decommissioned them and put them up for sale. Well, all of them sold except this one. They actually abandoned it. They packed their trash and walked away. And it sat abandoned for about 8 years.
Actually, a squatter lived here during that time.
Yeah, squatters lived here, but
which was a good
it wasn't
thing.
until 1953 when Martin County purchased the house and 16 and a half acres for less than $500.
Wow.
So it has a really interesting history. It just
lots of history.
But it's all about saving lives.
Right, and that's the Atlantic is so treacherous anyway. Then you throw hurricane season on top of that. Of course, we have a perspective now they didn't have back then, thanks to radar and what have you. When a storm was coming or brewing or whatever the term would be, how long after the storm would the keeper start his walk, or did he have to wait for it to clear out first?
As soon as possible. Often they started before the storm was over. You kind of have to put yourself in their position. Here they are. This guy is at least 60 miles from the next human being, and that's Jupiter Lighthouse, or Indian River Lagoon up north of here. So he comes out on the porch, and most of our weather comes right from the south. You can see it coming.
Quickly.
So, yeah, very quickly, like the other day. So he would come out and he'd look and say to himself, you know, this is going to be a good blow. I'll start. And he would start, like, go north first or go south first, depending on what his inclination was. Of course, if it's really like a hurricane, he doesn't go anywhere. He stays in the house. And unfortunately, one of the shipwrecks took place during, they called them tropical storms. They didn't call them hurricanes. They were tropical storms. But this tropical storm put this ship onto a reef 7 miles south of here. And the keeper and his teenagers went in the storm down to Jupiter Island to rescue. Now, how did they know there was a ship down there? The only guy that could swim on the ship dove in the water, swam to the shore, and walked up to the house of refuge.
Yeah,
Wow.
and you mentioned storms. I mean, some of these ships were like anywhere from 400 to 1,200 miles off a course. And, you know, people say, well, how could that be? You know, I know they don't have GPS, but they did have navigation tools. Well, a hurricane, you mentioned it. I mean, they don't see it coming. It starts brewing. They happen to sail in the wrong direction, and all of a sudden they find themselves, 40 yards hitting the Anastasia Rock out front.
Now, you said that in this one instance, the one crew member who could swim went and looked for help. How does a keeper and his family get multiple people from a shipwreck to safety? I mean, you can't hop on a golf cart. How do you haul people?
In the case of that particular shipwreck, the keeper put a rope around his waist, tied the other end of the rope to a rock, and his kids held it. And he went out to the ship and would bring them in, out to the ship and bring them in. That's not a requirement of the job. The job is shipwreck survivor. It doesn't say anything about go out and rescue these, but they did it.
Yeah.
They just.
Well, if somebody's drowning, I mean, I think most.
Yeah, you're not going to stand on the beach and
do
watch.
something about it. Yeah. But they didn't. They had very rudimentary, 1875 rudimentary life-saving gear. That once it got into the Coast Guard and ultimately the Navy also occupied the site, they had more advanced life-saving gears like britches buoys and tripod set on the beach. But that doesn't get in until about 1915 when the Coast Guard took over the property as a Coast Guard Station Number 207. But back in Keeper days, pretty treacherous, pretty lonely, pretty desolate, pretty dangerous actually, between Indian tribes and storms, and the fact that they had black bears here and things like that. So it was a very lonely and desolate area.
And that would weigh on your mind too. I mean, your mental health. I mean, it's similar to a lighthouse keeper, I would assume. It's very lonely.
Very lonely, yeah.
And this wilderness that these houses are in is really a hostile environment. And I've been here long enough that my imagination goes all sorts of places. And I'm thinking, here you are with you're maybe 25, your wife is maybe 20, and you've got this little kid. You can't open the front door and put the kid outside. A panther will eat him, So it's really just this incredibly difficult situation.
Not an easy life, actually,
right.
At the end of the day. I mean, think about, going and taking getting yourself clean in the Indian River in January when it's, maybe 54 degrees and a little bit rainy. I mean, they didn't have plumbing. They didn't have air conditioning. They didn't even have screens on the windows, so the bugs and stuff. So it was a very hard life for a keeper of the house for a myriad of reasons.
And how well did keepers survive? I mean, did any of them succumb to the elements? Did they have their way of staying healthy?
Yes. In the spectrum of the 10 houses, One keeper drank water right out of the cistern and in 4 days was dead. Another one succumbed to yellow fever. One whole household got cholera. So, and this is, they don't have doctors.
Yeah.
There is nothing on the other side of the Indian River Lagoon.
No bridges.
As far as you can go.
You know.
There's nobody. And here they are, you know, the wife gets cholera, the husband gets cholera, the 3 kids get cholera. Did they survive? Actually, in that family, 4 out of the 5 members did. You know, but still, one of the keepers here got sick. I'm not sure from what, but they brought somebody else in to help him, and he died. He died in like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
So, and he must have had something that, you know, who knows?
Could be the flu. I mean, he can die of the flu.
You know? Yeah. This is a swamp. You don't know what's out there.
I mean, they did have in the museum. There's a kind of a, I'll call it a rudimentary medicine cabinet. So they did have some, you know, cod liver oil, bandages, some basic first aid material, I'll call it. But, you know, you get something like cholera and you're probably bed stricken and could pass away pretty easily. Yeah.
What a difficult life. And I think, you know, whenever I was researching the House of Refuge, and all of them actually, you think mostly about those poor people on the ship, but you don't think about the people who have to live there waiting for those ships. On average, and I don't know if you can ask this or not, on average, how many shipwrecks would they be able to help, say, in a year? I mean, was it fairly common? I would assume so if there was a need for this.
We had one keeper who was here for 10 years and never had to deal with the shipwreck. So it's not, there is no average.
Yeah, there's no
The keeper
average.
that followed him had 2 in 24 hours. You know, and
there's no pattern to it.
But I can tell you, in this house, over the time that it was a house of refuge, 1876, 1915, they took in 44 survivors. So multiply that times 10.
Yeah.
And think, remember, we're in the wilderness. We're not Charleston, South Carolina. We're nowhere. That's a pretty goodly number.
Yeah.
That's well over
like
400 or 500 people.
You would say approximately a dozen wrecks in that time frame.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We have them listed in the museum by date. But there was one instance where the Cosme Gazaldo Spanish ship and the Georges Valentine, which we have offshore here, it's actually still there. People snorkel and stuff to it. Within 2 days, they had 2 wrecks, so they were overloaded with people. I mean, the house is not a huge house. So they had to change their ways of how to feed people. They had to increase, they used to eat like a combination of corned beef and pasta, and they would cook it in big vats on a wood-burning stove. And we have all that original artifact, well, not everything is original, but a lot of original artifacts in the House of Refuge.
They actually cooked in a wash tub.
Yeah. During that
put
time.
Put the wash tub on the wood burning stove, and it was like roadkill stew, and they just kept doing it.
Yeah.
One of the things that Mrs. Ray wrote was, it was her best time at the House of Refuge. 22 survivors, 18 of which are teenagers.
And they can interface with people because
they can interface with people.
They're lonely.
She said these kids cleaned, cooked, hunted, fished, and so there's non-perishables stored here for approximately 25 people. Now you've got 22 hungry kids, and so they did. They pitched in and they did everything together.
22 workers too.
There was 22 workers. They were here, I believe, 7 or 8 days. You can look it up. They go by meal, how many meals they serve.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of cool. You know, there's a certain I think it was 37 cents per person per meal. That was the budget from the government. So they keep track of that so that they can get the 37 cents.
And just a point on the record keeping. So this was a U.S. based organization. It was funded by the U.S. government. They were required to keep rec reports. So we actually have copies of the rec reports. We actually have the originals at the Elliott Museum. But they had to sit there and document, how many patrols they did, how many survivors, how many wrecks. And you could actually go down in the museum, and if you can read the handwriting back then, it's a little difficult, but we actually have that as an artifact in the museum.
It was a week or so for the refugees to stay, like a pretty typical time frame, or is that, again, it's hard to find an average?
Maybe that's hard.
In the beginning, in 1876, there's Titusville. That's 120 miles. So you are a shipwreck survivor. There's no communication. How do we let Titusville know that we have survivors? So here's the option. If you are hurt, you're going to stay here. If you are young and able, you can walk out. We'll give you food, water, and directions to the next house of refuge, who will give you food, water, and directions to the next house of refuge. And believe it or not, a lot of people took that option.
Well, think about it. They're trying to make their way home.
They want to go home.
Yeah.
You're a kid from Italy.
So the trains
your girlfriend's in Italy.
Yeah.
You're stuck on the Florida coast, and they say, well, listen, if you can walk through this mess to Titusville, which is a port, you can get home. Well, if you're a 17-year-old kid, 30 miles, give me some food and water. I'll be there tomorrow. That kind of thing. And it's amazing. And it took a while before they could get a system of the government office sending a boat down the intercoastal. In the beginning, God, if you saw the boat every 3 months, it was a miracle. But as population increases, the necessity increases. And so pretty soon you've got a pretty regular government boat coming down the intercoastal to do two things: supply the house with non-perishables and pick up shipwreck survivors.
Yeah, because the population was minimal. I mean, think of Florida in 1940. It was desolate here in 1940. And 1875, you're probably looking at, a handful of people living in all of Martin County.
Well, the 1880 census of southern Florida, that's Treasure Coast, south, was less than 400.
Yeah, people in the whole South Florida, essentially, from Treasure Coast all the way to Miami and Keys and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of paints a picture of the times, of how desolate it was. And if you get sick out here, like I said, they had some basic supplies and stuff, but everything traveled by boat. There was no bridges. There's very hard travel situations. Like I would assume if they had cholera or something like that, they would probably transport them maybe by a buggy to Titusville or something.
They couldn't. There's no communication.
Yeah.
Nobody has a telephone.
Yeah, exactly.
So the house that got cholera, they were sick until they got well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the way that worked. You just
died. Passed.
Yeah. Either get well or die.
I'm sure. I don't think we have records on people passing here, but you had shipwreck survivors that were injured. You had disease. You had a hostile environment with Indians and bears and stuff like that. So I'm sure through from 1875 that some people passed here at the house, for sure.
Not to mention infant death.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. You put a young couple in a house on the beach in the middle of nowhere, and they're going to have children, one right after the other, right after the other. How many of them survive? Don't have any figures. No, but we do know that a lot of children die. But then that was very normal at that period of time.
Yeah.
You know, if you lived to be 5 years old, they figure you were going to make it. So that's something. They also, and I always found this interesting, if someone passed away, they tried in the beginning to bury them right here on the island. And it didn't work because the bears would dig them up. So is that weird or what?
Not really. If you're hungry enough, you'll dig it up too.
So they would literally transport them to Sewell's Point, which is across the river from us. And there's a cemetery in Sewell's Point that when you go into the cemetery, some of the headstones are really, really way back there. They're
rumors of some ghost activity over there too.
Yeah, probably.
I'll have to check that out too. Which brings me to my next question for you. You brought up death and the hard life that the people that lived there and used the house went through. But before I ask my next question, just for time reference, how long have each of you been involved in the House of Refuge? How long have you been there?
10 years.
Yeah, I've been here only about a year in September.
Okay.
So I'm relatively new.
Okay. So while you've been there, I'm assuming based on our emails that you've experienced or encountered some strange things in the house that you can't explain.
They're strange only if you think they are.
We all have our instances.
Everybody who walks through this place, if I'm doing the tour or the lecture, is it haunted? Define haunted. I mean, there are people been living here for 4,000 years because before the House of Refuge, there was a Native American tribe. I prefer to think it has a real good memory. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it'll share its memory with you. Now, we do paranormal
investigation.
Investigate. Thank you. I was like paranormal whatevers, where we have a couple who run a paranormal thing. And so they come and, we do that. And so as it has been explained to me, there are several types of, and you can use the word haunting, that's fine. One is like a video clip that just keeps going and going and going, and you see the same thing. The other is the soul who is contented here, who likes it here. And, you get that kind of thing too. And it's like, yeah, if I had liked it here, I would stay. That's their heaven, I mean, do we have strange things going on? All the time. Have I ever been locked out of the house? Mm-hmm.
Me too. I've only been here a year.
You do. Boom, you're locked out of the house. Somebody plays a game with me. We have a downstairs, we call it the gallery. It's sort of underneath the porch. And every night when I leave, I turn off the lights and I lock the door.
They were on this morning, by the way.
There you go. Every morning when we come back, the lights are on. It's like, that's interesting. That's very interesting.
Some of it you can chalk up to like, maybe I didn't, maybe I did. But there's instances where I said I shut that light off and I made a mental note of it. And then sure enough, I come in. Now, could somebody have come here before? Maybe. I don't know, but I can't explain that the light's on.
There is no explanation.
Yeah. It's
that's just one of those things that just happens, and in the video that I sent you, a lot of it is smell. You get, at least I do. But then I can walk out on the porch and I can smell somebody smoking a cigar 5 miles down the road. It's just that kind of thing. But somebody sometime was a pipe smoker. And I recognized the smell because as I was growing up, pipe smoking was very vogue.
Common.
Every man smoked a pipe. And they all smoked these exotic tobaccos. Well, this guy likes cherry, you know, and I'll just walk in the house and I'll smell it. You know, and it's like, that's interesting.
Is there a specific room where it's more prevalent than others?
Oh, no. No,
Wow.
sometimes it's downstairs. Sometimes it's, I think he follows me. I don't know.
My experience has been a little bit different. The answer, the way I would answer that is, for me, yes. It's kind of right by the kitchen and below. There was one time I came up, Mike was we were doing a Beaujolais event here. He was talking with some marketing people. And I opened the house like I always do. I came back to the boathouse like I always do. And I then went back to the downstairs museum, and we have these wooden dividers to hide the air conditioner as you walk in. And it was on the floor. And the precarious thing about that was that if it fell the way, if the wind kind of pushed it, it would have smashed the displays in front of it. This fell from the bottom out because the displays were perfectly fine. And the displays are in the way if it fell down this way, if you kind of visualize what I'm saying. So how I can describe that, I'm not quite sure. Then I have another instance where I thought I heard somebody fall down the steps. I was up in the bunkhouse, in the same part of the house, but up on top. The bunkhouse was added on where they used to bunk down, the Coast Guard and the Navy and such. Heard something fall down the steps. I went down. I looked in the chimney. I looked in the tool shed. I looked everywhere, and there was nothing out of place. Nothing out of place. So
you heard something, but
my head saying, you know, okay, I'll take that for whatever. I'm a pretty logical guy, right? I'm, you know, if you asked me this before I started working here, I absolutely don't believe in ghosts. But, and Mike brings up a good point. What is haunted? Is it just the presence of somebody that lived here for, you know, 3/4 of their life and is still on occasion their spirit here? I'm starting to be a believer after those instances. Yeah.
You can't dismiss it.
You can't dismiss it.
You just can't go, boom, that didn't happen. One of the weirdest things that happened to me was during one of these paranormal investigations, and I'm sure you probably have this equipment, but they have this radio that doesn't have stations on it. It just makes white noise.
Right, the spirit box.
Waves.
Yeah. Well, one of these psychics is talking to this empty room, the dining room, and says, if you're in here, say hello to Mike. And the guy next to me is holding this radio, and it goes, hello, Michael. And I went, where did that come from? You know? And this guy's got this, his eyes look like a little orphan Annie. He's like, oh my God, that came out of here. And I was like, it's got to be a trick. You know, but
yeah.
But I don't know if it was. I don't know how they did it. You know, but Tricia says I am a ghost magnet.
Tricia is the paranormal.
She's the paranormal, and she says, you know, if you walk with us, we're constantly getting hits, and if you go over to the other group, they'll get the hits, and we won't.
He's got ghost magnets.
I'm a ghost magnet. I've had a friend of mine came out here to give me the keys to her mother's condo. And she is just a little left of center, okay? While I'm in the house cleaning, and she comes in and, you know, obviously hands me the keys, but then she starts talking to someone. And I looked at her and I said, who the hell are you talking to? And she said, that lady standing right there, don't you see her? I went, no. So she explains to me, Connie says, I see dead people. I said, okay, that sounds good.
But I will say this, right? And you never felt threatened by any of this. I didn't feel
I
threatened
never
by
feel
any of this.
threatened.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get the feeling like it was haunted and I was in trouble of,
Not at all.
it was kind of a friendly encounter.
Yeah, it's
hard to
always
describe.
friendly.
Yeah.
It's always friendly. And I've been here alone, 1 o'clock in the morning, locking up after some event or something like that. And, you would think it would creep you out.
Mm-hmm.
This is the warmest, nicest, loving house. And it really is. It really has an aura of safety. And you feel safe, and you feel safe with whatever.
Hence the name Refuge.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Right.
Hence the name Refuge.
That the people that live there, you'd have to be a good person in order to want to have your career to help other people. So I'm sure.
You're absolutely
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
How do you talk somebody into going out 120 miles from the nearest town? Go out there and save people. What kind of person does that?
Mhm.
Somebody who's really dedicated.
You talked about, hearing things and smelling things, and I guess a little bit of seeing things, how that divider fell. Have you ever, or anybody that have they seen anything in the house?
I have. I walked out. I don't know if you're familiar with this place or not, but we have a boathouse, the main house, and what we call the quarters. It was built during World War II for the one officer who was here. Well, anyway, that's our classroom. And I'm coming out of the quarters to go into the house. We're not open. And I walk out, and there's a man standing on the porch. There's 2 steps to the porch. I mean, 1 step, boom, you're on the porch. When I got to the top step to ask him who he wasn't there.
Wow.
And I literally stood there and thought, you finally saw it. You finally saw it. That very same day, there's a doorway right over to my left here that goes out into the yard. And I'm standing in the doorway, and I see the same guy walk across the patio, and when he gets to the end of the patio, he's not there anymore. Wow. Now, I don't see him disappear. He's just not there. And it's like, there again, I was like, that's really cool. I like that.
Right. You finally saw him.
It's one of the gals that worked here who did special events. She and I were here one night. It was like after the world's longest wedding reception. And we're cleaning up. And I am literally standing in the doorway of the house, and she's on the porch. And she goes, Michael, who just walked through the house? And I lean in and I look down the hallway. And I said, there's nobody in here, Erica. She said, somebody walked in front of the window. And I was like, well, there isn't anybody in the house. She said, I'm never coming out here after dark again. And she never did.
See, I've never actually seen a physical something. But I will say this, like Mike says, we're here alone. I mean, I come in some days, sometimes I come early and then you're here alone. And I don't know if you ever felt like just the presence, not seeing somebody, but feeling something. Mm-hmm. And that has happened to me several times when I was here alone, opening up the doors and getting the museum ready. And it's like, sometimes I opened up and then it would smell, I don't want to say of pipes, but it had a certain smell one day, and then you come in the next day. It's an old building, so you get these kind of old building smells, but they change. And then I notice when I smell something different, then I start thinking about it, then I feel a presence of something. I can't explain what, but.
We had to work separate. We had to work separate because of the virus. And the beaches were closed.
It was really quiet here. We almost looked like keepers of the 1800s. It's like, Mike, man, is it really quiet here or what? because it's almost put us back in the day.
It did.
Seriously, there was nobody here. That they fenced off over in here, so you couldn't even park here. The only car you would see is a cop car or a sheriff that would come from time to time, but that's it.
Yep.
The crows crowing out here is.
You definitely got the feeling of what it must have been like.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be so deadly quiet, I would think to myself, just if a car would go down the road. You know, this is insane. How did these people do this?
Yeah.
You know?
And as you pointed out, they didn't even have communication. They didn't have a phone or a computer or anything to keep them company.
Yeah,
and you were talking about, that presence. I've heard people that I've interviewed before talk about that and say it felt like they were being watched. Is that kind of how you felt? Were you being watched?
I just felt that there was a presence within the room. Now, whether they were watching me, I would more say like they were alongside me, not necessarily watching me. And then I start to think about that. I'm like, okay, so maybe it was the keeper and he's still up there or and he's almost like trying to communicate to fellow keeper kind of thing. I know that sounds weird, but I wouldn't say looking at me. I would say alongside me. It's the best I can describe it. In the room with me. Not like, with a camera looking down at me. Like, that would probably make me a little fearful. I have to leave. But I've never felt fearful.
I've never felt fearful.
I've never felt fearful about.
I know the watch feeling.
Yeah.
Being watched. Often if I'm rearranging things, that's when I'm being watched. You better not mess with that.
You're talking about artifacts or just in general?
Furniture, artifacts. We have the original living quarters of the keeper upstairs with original artifacts. So Mike does a really good job at changing it around sometimes, change the tablecloth, and he does a great job at that, by the way. You should come to the museum, by the way.
Mrs. Bessey's china.
Yeah, we have china from the 1875. We got a quilt up there.
When you mess with her china, you better be careful.
We have a hair, what do they call hair thing? The hair
wreath?
Hair wreath, which is made out of human
wife.
hair, which is original. I mean, there's some original artifacts. But anyway, it may be the keeper didn't like that. Maybe he liked the table where it was.
Yeah.
He liked the table where it was.
The table where it was. And yet, other times, I'll do something and you get that feeling of approval. I mean, nobody tells me what to do. But when that worked. That means that they're good with this. So I don't know.
You referenced, you said that you don't mess with her china. Who is she, and how do you know that she is there?
From the paranormal investigations, well, first of all, the china is documented having belonged to Susan Bessey, Keeper Bessey's wife. And during the paranormal investigations, several times, the paranormals will be talking to Mrs. Bessey, who usually gives her approval of me, which is, and I'm like, I'm standing there. The last one we did, I'm standing there, and this gal's got those rods that swing back and forth, and she's in tune with Mrs. Bessey, who is obviously right there. And do you like my beard? And these things are swinging back and forth, and this paranormal investigator saying, "Oh yeah, she likes this, she likes that," and I'm like, is this for real? I mean, is it like museum smoke and mirrors, or is it, is it really real? They believe it. The paranormal investigators honestly believe in what they're doing. I have a good time. So, I'm sort of, with the exception of the time it said, "Hello, Michael," most of the time I'm like, this is fun. It's fun.
Yeah, and I will say, in reference to the female, voice, whether it's Mrs. Bessey or whatever. I have heard a soothing woman's voice from a couple times.
She called you.
Very, very, yeah, she called me.
She
She
called
called my name. It was a Brian and a fade out, but it was very soothing to me. It was welcoming. And it was a female's voice for sure.
So set that up for me. What were you doing when you heard that, and what was your reaction?
This is the same instance when the dividers came out, and I was like dumbfounded about that. I thought Mike might have came downstairs and for whatever reason was messing with the air conditioner or something. As soon as I opened the door to come out of this end of the museum, I heard of just a Brian and just a very soothing female voice, Brian, like that. And I was like, was that Mike from up top? Because the wind shifts here. Like the people fish on the dock, and when the wind's blowing east towards you, it kind of comes to you. Like, so I thought maybe that. And I don't know if you remember.
Me,
I went around and I went up to Mike.
me?
I'm like, Mike, first off, were you downstairs? He's like, no. I said, secondly, did you just call me about 5 minutes, however long ago? And he said, no. And I'm like, wow. But it was for sure a woman's voice in a very soothing delivery.
Well, and it's comforting to know that for both of you that everything has been a positive, for you. Like, you don't feel threatened, you don't feel scared. It's always, like you said, the woman with the divining rods, she likes you. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, it's not the same. Like I said, it's a very warm situation where, as a teenager, when you would go on the cemetery raids because, they were haunted, I'd be scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
Really. And just terrified to
Trust
be in
me,
the middle of a cemetery in the middle of the night, and
if
go
it was,
sit on Black Aggie's lap so that when a cloud goes over the moon, she walks, and all that, I'd be like, whoa!
if it was threatening, I wouldn't be working here.
Yeah, that's true. If it was threatening, none of us would be here.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, I'm interested in a little bit more detail on the man you saw a couple of times. Do you remember what did he look like? What was he dressed like? Any idea who he might have been from a history perspective?
I know because of the way he was dressed, he was a sailor from World War II because he had on a blue work shirt and dungarees. I didn't get a good impression of his face. It just, it registered as a man. There's a man there, and yeah, he had a face. It wasn't blank. I'm sure he had a face, but it didn't register. It didn't register. What registered was the clothing. And I guess because I'm kind of a World War II interested person, you can't read enough about it, you can't learn enough about it, that's what excited me. I know he's a sailor, I know he's from World War II.
Mike's a veteran.
Yeah, and an army brat to top it all. But that's what registered. And the funny part about when I saw him on the patio, there were other people on the patio who were guests here, and he registered as a guest until he didn't come down the ramp. When he didn't come down the ramp, I was, that's the same guy I saw this morning. But again, no face that I could recognize. And we have photographs of the guys who were here during World War II. And I have looked at them, and nobody Nobody stands out to me.
Mm.
You mentioned the guests that were there. Have you had guests who have come up to you and said, I feel something weird or I saw something strange? Do guests have their own stories?
Oh, yeah.
I have one
Yeah.
story regarding that, which was really bizarre. And it gets into the woman discussion as well. So I'm in the gift shop. We have a gift shop. We have people coming out when it gets busy. Some people wait outside. We have a little sitting area, right? So I took care of a bunch of people. They went into the museum with a volunteer. And I'm looking out the window here, and there's a guy like looking up at the top of the house up here, which is the bunk. Kind of, remember I said in the same area as where I've seen everything, actually, or heard, experienced, whatever. And I walked out. I thought there was something wrong with the guy. I'm like, you okay? And he said, dude, there's a ghost in that house.
Yes, I remember.
And he said, and it's a woman. And he said, on my grave, I've seen her, something like that. And he kept staring up at here. He kept staring like this. I couldn't even, I'm talking to him and he's staring up there as I'm having this conversation with him. And I said, whatever, man, I don't know what to tell you. If that's what you believe, that's what you believe, So that was that was the only patron of the museum. He didn't even come in the museum, by the way. He just came into that little waiting area and looked up. We had a conversation, and he left. He didn't come in the museum, which was also odd. But anyway, that was one patron that.
There's a cold spot. There's a cold spot in the house, and several times people have been standing there, and they've gone, I'm really cold.
Where is that spot? Is that also upstairs?
Actually, it's on the main floor, and it's right in front of the medicine chest, which is underneath the stairs. The stairs come down like this, and there's a little closet, and that's what. And the paranormals tell me, this is a cold spot. Something bad happened here to someone, and I never feel it. I've even stood there on purpose.
Well, I will say a lot of the keepers and their families complain about being cold.
Yeah.
Here, and you can see that, right? I don't care if you're in Florida, man. In January, when I come in the morning and it's raining and the wind is blowing about 40 knots, I couldn't imagine. And they didn't have screens on the window either, so. Lots of them complain, and by the way, they wore a lot of clothes. Like you look at the Navy, even the Navy, even the keepers, they wear overcoats and hats, and a lot of them complain about being cold. I don't know if that's related to the cold spot.
I don't know but the George's Valentine, the guys from the George's Valentine had been in the water for days in that storm.
Yeah, so talk about being cold.
Right, and Mrs. Ray coated them with petroleum jelly and made them gauze pajamas because their skin was so compromised from the salt water.
Yeah, freezing too.
Wouldn't that make you cold?
Oh, gosh,
yes.
Yeah,
it would.
You would die. I mean, I would venture to say some of them died of hypothermia in wrecks, especially if it's in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Because I don't care if it's Florida, it's cold.
Right. And that wreck you're speaking of is the one that's just offshore, right? That people still die.
The one that's right out front.
What year was that wreck? Do you know off the top of your head?
1904.
1904?
1904, yeah.
1904, October 16th, 1904. And there were 12 souls on board and 7 were rescued.
Okay. So there were a few that did not make it to shore and died is that considered died at sea?
They died on impact. The George's Valentine was an Italian bark, and it was loaded with American mahogany already in board.
Which was dangerous too, because that broke out, right, in the waves.
They didn't tie their stuff down in those days. They just put it on the boat and off they took.
Dangerous in the surf.
And they had been on their way to South America. And on the Straits of Cuba was where they got picked up in this horrendous storm. And it just dragged them north to Hutchinson Island. When they hit the reef and the boat came apart, those boards became projectiles.
Very dangerous, yeah.
And the five that died right on impact were hit by flying debris.
Yeah, bled out,
The one swam to shore, came up and knocked on the front door. And when the keeper opened the door, the guy was standing there completely naked. His clothes had been ripped off by the surf. And he explained to the keeper, we hit the reef out there. Now we're on the beach. Can you come and help?
And that's literally 100 feet out from the south end of our property here.
Yeah, that's
very
how
close.
much erosion.
Yeah, it was further out years ago, but right now, 100 feet out, you can there. The structure's still there. We have videos of it here in the museum and such.
And that's amazing for many reasons. But when we first started our conversation, you talked about how the keeper would have to walk 15 miles north, 15 miles south.
Yeah, and then it
He didn't have to
happens
go
right
anymore.
You had to walk 15 feet on George's Fountain.
Do you happen to know who the keeper family was at the time? And I'm sure they.
William Ray.
I'm sorry.
William Ray. And I think that is R-E-A.
It is REA.
And yeah, I mean, it's not lucky by any accounts. It's a shipwreck, but how lucky that they wrecked right by a house of refuge.
Yeah, otherwise they probably all would have been dead.
Were they all from Italy? Were they Italian?
No, they weren't. We had a very interesting visit from the president of the Navigational Institute of Camaggi, Italy, who I spent a wonderful afternoon with. And he had a list of who the crew were and where they were from. Most of them, yes, were Italian, but a couple of them were Spaniards.
Mm.
Okay.
The next day, when we get 15 survivors from the Cosmo Casaldo, they were from all over the world, and it was a Spanish ship. And only 2 of them spoke English. And one of them was Scottish. So is that really English, or is that just,
That's Scottish.
It's like, wow, that's a toughie. But they managed to communicate. I guess they all knew enough Pidgin English, and the keepers knew enough Pidgin Italian or Pidgin Spanish that they communicated very well. And these kids, especially from the Cosmo Casaldo, after they got home, would send Mrs. Ray postcards. And just, and they called her mother. Now, this is how young those kids were. She couldn't have been more than 35, and they're calling her mother. But it would be mother got married.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, so there was interesting communication, interesting dynamics between people who were rescued and the people who rescued them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's such a traumatic situation, and then to have somebody to care for you, I'm sure there's there's
bonding.
Oh.
Some bonding, and a thankful bonding at that. Because without the House of Refuges, a lot of these people are just, where are you going to go? You're in the surf, mahogany shooting at you, and there's nobody around for 300 miles. So there is I would assume, an appreciation factor there.
One guy who was a survivor actually became a keeper. And he was from Norway. His name was Axel Johansson. And Axel washed up on the beach up around Chester Shoals, was taken in, they fixed him up, they sent him back to Norway. A couple of months later, he comes back. knocks on the door, Chester Shoals, and proceeds to tell the keeper that he's going to marry his daughter, Kate. So he does. Kate and Axel become keepers of this house of refuge. Then there's a period where they go to another house of refuge. They used to swap. I guess you get sick of being in the same place all the time. Well, anyway, long story short, Axel hears that this house is going to become a Coast Guard station. He joins the Coast Guard, and he and Kate come here and take over this as a Coast Guard station.
He was the superintendent, the first superintendent of the Coast Guard Station number 207 when it converted.
So what kind of dynamic is that? You know,
that's a really,
you go to Norway, you come back, you marry Kate. Yeah, interesting.
Sounds like fate. Sounds like he was in the right place.
It absolutely must have been. You know, and he was completely devoted to life saving. I mean, to go from keeper to Coast Guard, and you know, and I guess he retired from the Coast Guard.
It was his trade. That's what he knew, and
right, and it goes back.
Yeah, and he'd been a sailor.
It goes back to the good souls that it took to do this kind of job. You know, it had to be good people.
Well, they also got a paycheck, which was kind of hard to do when there's 300 people in South Florida. So It was a job that they actually got paid. I believe they had to provide their own food, but they did get a paycheck from the U.S. government.
One thing I noticed earlier, and I promise we're almost done. I know I just passed 40 minutes. Earlier, when Brian was telling the story about hearing something strange and the divider falling, Mike, I was watching your face, and you just kind of had this grin, like, yeah. So do you find yourself in that position a lot because you've been there for 10 years where people will tell us, like, yeah, welcome to the club?
Welcome to the club. Brian has experienced in the short time he's been with me everything I've experienced.
He never told me this when he interviewed me.
Yeah, I didn't tell him that part. I didn't tell him about packing the house for a hurricane.
Dorian, we can go on.
Yeah, you know, he's been through it all. He's here for good. Yeah, so yes, I get very tickled. I do, and that experience when he came around, did you call me? No. I thought.
It's interesting hearing the stories and how they all tie together. I mean, you hear the voice. The gentleman outside talks about seeing somebody upstairs. That just always fascinates me. Before I let you guys go, was there anything I didn't ask about? Whether from experience or from the history standpoint of the house that you want me to include that you think is important to add?
We need to get into turtles and Indians and stuff like that, right?
Not really.
I mentioned the Midland Indians.
You've done your research, so you know we were a house of refuge, we were a Coast Guard station, we were a naval observation station. We were also the home of the sea turtle repopulation
program, actually,
which is important. I could never underestimate that, but that's not where the tapestry is.
Yeah, that's not what made the House of Refuge. That came in the 50s to the 80s. A noble cause, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, Ross Witham, this is Witham Beach. He did a repopulation. We had tanks in the back. But it's not the main focal point of why we are called the House of Refuge. It's all about life-saving. Actually, I think because there's also, prior to the House of Refuge, there's artifacts from Indians from the 1500s, the Ais Indians, who were the original inhabitants of this area. There's original artifacts that were dug out of midden layers, local midden layers right here. So there is, prior to even the House of Refuge, there's an Indian history as well. With, you know, Jonathan Dickinson, who documented all the Indian activities, the interaction between the tribes, so on and so forth. But Mike's right. I mean, the reason why we're the House of Refuge is mainly the history of the U.S. life-saving service.
And that's where most of the stories are.
Yeah.
Certainly.
I don't dwell on the Native American history. You know, I'm sure there are souls and souls and souls.
Yeah.
4,000 years,
Yeah.
you know, there's got to be some of that energy in here. But the energy I feel is all attached to the house.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you also have like a bootlegging history
Oh, yeah,
here
we
as well.
forgot the bootleggers.
That's the whole bootlegging thing. And Stewart, that's really an interesting whole story. But I don't think that's of the format of what you're looking for. But there is a bootlegging history here.
Have you ever been here?
I have not, and I need to get over that.
Yeah, it's a really cool place.
Yeah.
I would like to. Are you guys open yet? Or are you still waiting for the?
No, we're not.
I'd say
not that I'm coming today, but
sometime in June, I think we're going to open. We don't have a date yet.
The rumor, you know, the rumor is maybe the third week of June. You know, the problem is, how do we social distance in a 4-room house that's 35 feet long?
yeah, that's tough.
We can do it. We can do it.
We can do it. We've worked on it. We know how we're going to do it. It's just a matter of when we're going to be allowed.
Yeah, because we have some really good volunteers, docents, volunteers that know the history inside out and backwards here. So we did guided tours, and then some people are locals here. They come here 12 times a year. It's like, I'm a local. I know everything. You need a guided tour? Nah, I know everything about this place. Probably can teach me some things, right? So we may not initially be able to do the guided tour, which is, in my opinion, the best value for the buck. I mean, for $7, you're getting, if you get one of the more experienced docents, a highly educating tour of the history of the Treasure Coast, not like everything. Like John Tichy will talk about, we'll talk about the bootleggers, and then the military, we didn't even talk about U-boats. So we have an observation tower that was used to spot U-boats and Germans coming ashore on top of the House of Refuge, right? Mm-hmm. So this place, I mean, we can tell almost a whole story about the German U-boat and the World War II days and the Navy days here, right? So it's hard to just sum it all up, but at the core of it, just once again, the House of Refuge and the U.S. Lifesaving story is what really put. Oh, we forgot about pirates. Gilbert's Bar. Gilbert's Bar. So it's the House of Refuge at Gilbert's Bar. Well, Gilbert was a pirate, and his name started to appear on the Florida maps in the 1600s as Gilbert's Bar. And he was a pirate, a gnarly dude that was actually hung in Boston in 1835 for many, many murders. And he used to hang out here in the Indian River and board ships and set them afire, steal the gold, that whole story. And he's one of many pirates in this area.
He could very well be the gnarly old dude on the rocks. Now, I've never seen this guy. I've never seen him, but I know people who have. And
that's
there's
possible.
This old dude sitting on the rocks, just looking out at the ocean. And it's like, and he's wearing old time clothes, and it's like, okay, another one.
It's a whole other story. So anyway, there is other history, but the main part of it, on top of the House of Refuge, the ghost and all that, you have Indians, you have turtles, you have pirates, you have smugglers, you have bootleggers.
And then they have us.
Yeah, then they have us. Yeah.
All right.
It's amazing. Like when I first started working here, I used to fish out here on the rocks, and I had no idea what this place was even. It looked like a compound. What is this place, I read the sign, 10 houses, whatever. Then I started working here, and then flabbergasted by the amount of history in this location. I was just flabbergasted. I'm like, I had no idea. And the further you dig into it, the more interested you get. And then it goes off into World War II, and there's things there, and the House of Refuge, and shipwreck survivors, and Indians. It's just amazing amount of history. Amazing.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is, while the paranormal stuff is fascinating to me, I'm kind of like Mike. I'm on the fence. I don't really know what I believe. I've seen maybe one or two things, but the history of Florida, so many people just think of beaches and theme parks. They don't think about the rich history other than that. And there's so much here.
There's so much history,
Yeah.
so much. And there's sites around here all over. You know, you have Sewell's Point. They moved the post office over here to Indian River State Park. You have museums and locations in Fort Pierce. You had the shipwreck of 1715, which was right off of Huron Beach, and people still finding coins on the beach, which was like, I don't know, 4 months ago, they're finding medallions.
Yeah.
So you have that whole thing, you know, and it goes on and on and on. So I found that
I'm from
intriguing.
the Northeast, so of
So
course
am I.
when I got here, I thought, there's no history here.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I come here and this was built in 1875, and I'm thinking the doorknobs in my Baltimore townhouse are older than that.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah,
Kind of
exactly.
thing. But then, of course, I started getting into it, and fascinating.
Really
Absolutely
fascinating.
fascinating.
Really fascinating.
So.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for all this great information. I'm really excited to dig in a little bit further and piece this together.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had a chance yet to listen to any of the episodes that I've done. That's more of it's a storytelling kind of a thing, you know, with some music in the background and that kind of. I'm also taking the interviews and putting them on my YouTube channel so people can see the interaction. And I'm still new at this and figuring out how all that's going to look. But once this is done, I will definitely send you a link so you can listen to it.
Yeah, please do so. Yeah.
So you can hear what I've done. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording because nobody needs all this. Hey everybody, Steve here again. I hope you enjoyed that bonus content. If you have any ideas for an episode or your own paranormal experience you'd like to share with me, let me know through the phantomhistory.com website.